Hola, mi gente. My name is Maria Lopez Twena. I'm the author of the bilingual children's chapter book and animated family series, Mariví, the Master Navigator, and the creator of this new podcast, Navigating Dos Mares, or Navigating Two Seas. Mariví, the Master Navigator, was created for all immigrant families, but especially for children who are growing up with two cultures and two languages, navigating life for themselves and their foreign-born relatives. This podcast was created to help us older kids, or the adult children of immigrants, better understand our childhood experiences and the impact that they've had on our lives. In this episode, we'll hear our guest share their story about growing up bilingually and biculturally, and how their childhood experiences became their superpower. Thanks for joining our community. Bienvenidos. In this episode, we'll be speaking to Stephen Paez, a marketing industry leader and a dear friend as well. Stephen, thank you for joining.
Thank you, Maria, or should I say Mariví?
You can say Mariví, that's fine. Mariví Senior.
The inspiration.
The inspiration for Mariví. So, Stephen, you know the Mariví story. We are the Mariví story. Tell us about your background, growing up, where you were born, which generation you are, all that good stuff.
So I was born in Miami. My parents were first generation Cuban. Both of them immigrated during the revolution. My mother she was sent on her own to meet family here because her family wasn't able to come. She was one of three, the oldest of three. And then my dad and his family also came at a similar time when the revolution was happening, but they actually they had a boat and they came from Cuba on the boat that they owned. So it was very different, but similar in terms of how they got to the U.S.
Wow, I haven't heard that story. So they weren't married in Cuba. They met here?
Yeah, my mom, they were both. So they were born in the late 40s and they came in the early 60s. So they were around 10, 11, which is definitely very interesting and impacted my upbringing for sure.
So tell me about the household and the neighborhood. Was it very Latino? What was that like?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, the household was definitely a very bicultural household, right? And something that was very interesting was that when they were taking into consideration what to name us, they wanted for both my brother and I to be very assimilated. So my brother is Edward Andrew, and I'm Stephen Alexander. So.
Wow, this is super interesting. We've heard that from a couple of other folks that the parents gave them American names because they didn't want them to suffer.
And also I think it's what that original immigration experience was, especially being younger.
Right.
They weren't proud of the heritage. They wanted to really Americanize themselves and have us fully assimilated.
Totally. Okay. Was the neighborhood very Latino, or was there?
It was. We were born in Hialeah, so where we grew up. We went into Miami Lakes as we grew older, and they were able to become, more financially secure. We moved into this area, Miami Lakes, but yeah, it was definitely a Hispanic forward culture, but there was still a need to speak English, which is very interesting now.
So, okay, you said bicultural household or bilingual household. So did you and your brother speak English to each other and Spanish to your parents, and they spoke Spanish to each other, or how was that dynamic?
So it was interesting. My mom was actually more English forward. So while we were living in Hialeah, my grandmother had a house and we had a house next door to my grandmother. My grandmother, interestingly enough, my maternal grandmother, interestingly enough, knew how to write English better than probably I've ever been able to, but she wouldn't speak it out of embarrassment. Uh-huh. So with her, I always spoke in Spanish, but she understood it. And then with my dad was a combination of more English and Spanish, probably a little bit more heavy Spanish. And then my mom was definitely more English, but certain culturally, like we called her mommy.
Was the ethos in the household very Latino, very collective? It's all about family and community. It's not about yourself. Or was it more both because they had had an earlier experience here as immigrants?
It was definitely a combination of the two, where it was, you know, family was important. And we were definitely like, when I consider, especially my maternal side of the family, it was always like, I was one of 5 cousins, and it was always like us 5 together. You know,
Yeah.
It was definitely more of that communal type of experience from that.
From that perspective. Okay. Sounds like they knew English. So did you ever have to play the role that Mariví has played, interpreter, translator, any of that in your childhood?
More so for my grandmother, right? Because when we would stay with my grandmother, we would definitely have to do that. I think there were still instances when we would have to be like the translators, depending in the situation that we were. But my mom was definitely much more fluent in English, so it just depended on the situation.
Any culture clashes at home, or did they embrace the part of you that wanted to be Americano?
We always had this instilled behavior to understand that we were Latino and like Hispanic, and that we were Cuban, right? And that was definitely something that we were made to be proud of. And they always were very prideful of where they came from, but with the idea that there is an expectation of how to move forward and improve yourself from an American perspective. So I think that probably is where the culture clash would happen, right? Like in terms of outside of the house, you're very American. And then in the house, you're definitely like the Cuban customs lived at home. So that was definitely, you know what I mean? So
I totally
was definitely the interesting part, right? Like there was never, to your original question, there was never anything that they would let, because of our cultural heritage, not allow for us to improve in our future. So whether it was schooling or whether it was education, they always made sure that our culture wasn't a detriment to that.
Yeah, wonderful. That's a great gift. Yeah. So I've heard in these podcasts over and over again, and you brought it up too, this sense that we are two people. I don't mean it like that, but two personas, two personalities, two beings. Like we are at home, we're Latino, but the minute you would step outside, you were American. At least for those of us that grew up outside of Miami or big metro areas that were Latino. And then this code switching that we constantly lived as children. Have you given that much thought or?
When we were younger and we would go either to baseball tournaments or like different conferences for schooling and whatnot, that's definitely where you started to see the difference between who I was versus what the rest of the country really looks like, right?
Uh-huh.
It's this idea that we are different, and we grew up in a very nurtured area that allowed us to be ourselves, but still the mindset that you're working towards speaking perfect English, and you're working towards being very American, and whatever that means, right? Like, and that is definitely an interesting perspective of how that code switching happens, right?
Yeah. And so, which has been interesting, Stephen, because in these podcasts, since those individuals that grew up in metro areas that were very nurtured and supported, they experienced the culture clash in situations like you, some of them when they got to college, or some when they started work for the first time and they worked for an American company and were like, oh my goodness, I need a whole new wardrobe for this company. I need to act differently in this company. Did you experience that? I know you did during the leagues or the baseball events or what have you, but then when you get to corporate America.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point, Maria, because to be completely honest, like I didn't think I was everyone was like me, right? It wasn't even that I didn't think I was different. It was everyone was like me from a cultural perspective and whatnot. And even through the onset of my career, I started working in Miami, but I ended up moving to Chicago. And when I was in Chicago, they're like, "You have an accent," and I'm like, "What?" Like, I was always told that I had a lisp, but I never knew I had an accent. So for me, it was the first time hearing this. I'm like, "Are you sure you're not talking about my lisp?" And no, they're like, "No, you have an accent," and I'm like, "What?" So definitely that was a culture shock for me. It was like, "Oh wow, I'm culturally different than where I am," right? Like that's super interesting. Working in a corporate setting, that was that brought to life a lot of interesting feelings, right? Of how does your culture affect your work? How that false sense of what do they call it? Imposter syndrome, right? In terms of that does definitely lead to some of those feelings. And it, I always say I'm Hispanic enough.
Did you ever feel like part of that imposter syndrome is a feeling of not belonging
Right.
not there's a difference between fitting in and belonging, right? So did you ever in that experience feel at first, oh, I don't belong, or I have to change a little bit of who I am to belong?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's even funny because one day we were down in a pitch in Miami and someone on the team's like, "Oh my God, everyone sounds like you down here." And I'm like, "Yeah, what did you think? Like I was from an alien or I was making up my accent the whole time?" You know what I mean? Like, but yeah, I think it's definitely funny to have to think about, what gestures or, um, how you have to adjust yourself to be able to be like others, right? Because I don't think it was ever a fit-in situation, fortunately. But I do think it's like, how do I not look or act differently?
Yes.
And then I think that's not only from a cultural perspective, it was also a situation for me coming out, right? Like, that was, I honestly think that was a bigger challenge for me to overcome than my culture, because I think from my perspective, I'm definitely proud of my culture, and I've finally been able to be comfortable and proud of who I am, both from a sexuality perspective and a cultural perspective. So that definitely was an evolution that caused both, right? From a workplace.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you. What have you had this event that people talk about, this feeling like I have returned and embraced myself, this retroculturation, and when did it happen and how did it happen?
So yes, definitely. And we did a whole, one of the agents, through my marketing career, we worked on a study that really pointed this out as one of the key components from a Latino Hispanic perspective. And there's definitely trigger points. And it was evident for me, and mine was when I was starting to work in the industry. So I graduated college. I did a double major in international business and marketing. I didn't do advertising, so that was interesting. And I started working at a smaller agency that was focused on Hispanic advertising. And I was like, I still understood Spanish, but definitely had lost as much of it when I was growing up. I definitely spoke it much better. And that's where I started to learn all about like the idea that Hispanic, that idea of retroculturation, that idea of how far we've evolved, right? From where when I was born, that it really needed to be heavily assimilated, to now the idea of acculturation and being able to be loud and proud of your Latino culture, which I think that was my turning point in terms of like this is something that is not only extremely prideful, it's something that I've been given the opportunity to be able to bring mainstream, so to speak, from a business perspective. So that was for me what was my turning point in terms of re-engaging with my culture, re-engaging from, it's interesting because I don't think I've ever disowned my culture, but definitely more so further embracing it and further being an advocate for it. It was not only, it wasn't an experience that I felt was only for me. I felt like I need to be a voice for this community. And that's why it was even more critical for me to more heavily ingrain myself in the community to be able to be an advocate for this community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so beautiful. It's such an amazing journey, isn't it? Once you go through that process, yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it does come with a lot of responsibility because you want to remove the onus from others that are going through it or that may not have gone through it. Yeah, I mean, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I said it on another call that I remember pre-retro acculturation being in New York at like a grocery store and speaking to someone who clearly spoke Spanish. Clearly Spanish was his first language. And I would have made his life easier if I had just ordered in Spanish, but I didn't.
Yeah.
I'm ashamed of it now, but I look back on it and I think, well, okay, that was a period in my life where I wanted to be very Americana.
But Maria, I think that that's an interesting point too, because my experience has been, and Chicago specifically, like I've tried and sometimes they won't respond to me in Spanish.
Yes.
Right? Like it's like, is it actually your pride or is it their pride that doesn't let you?
Yeah.
Whereas vice versa, in Miami, sometimes they're like, actually, I was traveling a couple of days ago and I ordered something in English and she spits it back to me in Spanish. And I'm like, all right, I guess.
Right, I guess okay. This is going to be in Spanish.
It is. Funny. And it's not that I ordered it in English because I don't know why. Like, I was in that mindset.
Yeah.
But then when she spits it back to me in Spanish, but that's the amazingness about it, that we were just able to flip back and forth from it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. What do you feel? Well, you're in Miami, so what do you feel today? Completely Latino, totally bilingual, bicultural, more Americano? What are you feeling today?
I would say a very proud bicultural Hispanic.
Yeah.
That's where I feel that, I have no shame in terms of saying that I'm Latino. I'm very proud of it. I think it's even more interesting, the gift of being able to speak two languages. And not only the gift of being able to speak two languages, the ability to understand different cultures.
Yes.
And being able to navigate both in terms of having the emotional intelligence to be able to react differently, or what is expected when you're in different environments.
Correct. Well said. That's exactly right. So, Stephen, what advice would you give to someone who hasn't retroacculturated yet and is kind of living this, to some degree, this imposter syndrome? Like, I'm acting like I'm this, but deep down on the weekend, I'll call someone and I'm really Latino. You know what I mean? What advice would you give to someone? What could they do to start tapping back into their roots, or what thoughts do you have around that?
I think it's first understanding what's not letting you happen. Like, what's that barrier for you to connect with culture, right? Because I've heard a lot of times it might be language, right? Well, that's not necessarily the case in terms of really diving into and understanding who you are and where you're from. So I think that uncover it. Don't be afraid of it. There's never, in my opinion, there's never been a more important time to be proud of who you are. And your culture is definitely something to be proud of. And and especially if you if you're creating generations to come, you know, that is something that is definitely critical for you to instill. And it not only critical for you to instill, but you have the honor to be able to pass that on. So don't forget that.
Yeah. And absolutely. It is a gift. And the more we love the totality of who we are, the better we are as humans, right? I mean, when we deny,
we're only our best selves.
We're only our best selves. Agreed, 100%. Well, this has been great. I don't know if you have any other words of wisdom you'd like to share with any listener.
I just think, first and foremost, thank you for the opportunity to be able to share my story. And it's always such a pleasure. And, you know, you've done such a phenomenal job to capture what it is and what the feelings are. So, you know, to your last question, it's a great gift and honor to be able to be bicultural and to have those different perspectives. So don't hide it or don't be ashamed of it for anyone. So.
Yeah, thank you. This is great. Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah,
thank you. And for anyone who wants to reach out to Stephen or learn more about Stephen, he is
on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and please join us on our next episode of Navigating Dos Mares. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at We Are Mariví, or check out our books on our website, wearemariv.com.